and welcome back to another one of our end of year chats for 2021. This time around, we're talking all about psychedelic business. I'm Brian McGovern, Senior Editor for the Investing News Network, and with me today, joining me to discuss psychedelics, is James Halifax, host of the Psychedelic Investor. James, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me on the program, Brian. It is a pleasure to be back here. We always have great conversations.
Very excited to get to hear your thoughts on the market. It's been a very busy year, 2021 for psychedelic investment. So let's just dive in and big picture. Do you have one word or one phrase that you feel like encapsulates the year as a whole?
I guess the best I could come to that would be in the market, it's been two different stories or a tale of two different stories, especially over the past 6 months when it comes to the market for psychedelic stocks. To expand on that a little bit, on the one hand, we have what some may describe as absolute carnage in the markets. If you look at the last 6 months for stocks like MindMed or Atai, they're down like 40+%, I believe. And then a bunch more like Field Trip are down 30% in the last 6 months. So if you're just zooming out and taking a look at the stock price and not taking in any more information, you would come along or come away with the perspective that, oh, golly, it's been a absolutely horrible year or 6 months for psychedelic stocks. But if you just stop your analysis with the stock price and that's all you look at, you really miss some of the more what I would call bullish signs in the market. There's been lots of, lots of these companies have been making really good headway into their development of these psychedelic medicines. So I'm thinking of like Cybin, for example. They have introduced their new compound called CYB003, which is a modified version of psilocybin, which kind of counteracts some of the issues that psilocybin therapy has, being in that right now psilocybin therapy has an issue in that it takes too long is the big issue, because if you're on a full dose of psilocybin, that can last anywhere between 6 to 10 hours. And if we want to make psilocybin therapy affordable, we need to have a shorter acting version, one that can be 1 to 2 to 3 hours. And that's what CYB003 is. Or if we look at Atai, they started, I don't even know how many trials this year. It's like 3 or 4 of them testing different things from ibogaine to DMT. Actually, I'm not sure if their DMT trial started or not, to a version of ketamine. If you look at MindMed, likewise, they started a bunch of phase 1 trials, and before the end of the year, they're planning on starting 2 of their kind of big flagship trials. So you've got your Project Lucy, which is treating anxiety or anxiety disorder using LSD. And then you have Project, I'm forgetting the project name, but treating adult ADHD with microdoses of LSD. That's a phase 2 trial. And that's also set to start in the next few weeks. So if you look at the progress these companies are actually making in the hard scientific area, it looks quite good. Like all of these companies are chugging along quite nicely. And when they had that huge run up in their stock prices, most of the companies like Compass, like MindMed, they were able to refinance when their stocks were at like really high prices to get hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to fund their company's research into the future. So they're in a stable financial position at the moment, even if their stock price is coming down. And something that, interrupt me if I'm speaking too much, but something that that anybody who even is thinking about investing in the psychedelic sector needs to be aware of is that this is a long-term investment. You need to have a 5+ long year time horizon here, because it's going to take 5+ years for these different programs to work their way through the 3 different phases of clinical trials. And then B, while they're doing this, because of the nature of this biopharma industry, the stocks are going to be extremely volatile. And you could see what we're seeing right now, where these stocks are down a third, down 40%. It could get worse, down 50, 60, 70%. Like, we're not mind readers. I wish I was. I wish I had a crystal ball. But if you're investing in these spaces, you need to understand that this is going to be a long and volatile ride. And we're going to see instances like now, and we might also see the flip side, like we saw like 8 months ago or 10 months ago, where these stocks like 4 or 5, 6x in the matter of weeks. So we should really be expecting this bumpy ride. So yeah, just to kind of bring together everything I said there, really a tale of two different stories. The science side, which is what ultimately matters in 5, 6, 7 years, is progressing how we would hope to see it progress, even if on the other side of it, the stocks aren't doing the greatest right now.
But James, let me ask you, investors, they really have to be up to date here with when it comes to the information that these companies are giving in terms of the data, in terms of the progress of these tests. Do you feel like the sentiment of the market will continue to move as these studies continue to progress until ultimately we do end up getting one big final approval?
I mean, it's a good question because it might be impossible to answer, as most good questions are. But for me, part of the reason that I think we're seeing a lot of the downturn isn't necessarily due to negative news stories, but rather in the mainstream media, at least, a lack of news stories. So if we look at to when all these when these companies were making their big jumps in the news, we had I'm blanking on what they're called, the MAPS phase 3 clinical study that came out that was treating PTSD using MDMA that showed like 68% of people were essentially cured and 88% of people had their PTSD symptoms reduced by greater than 50%. We had the IPO of Atai. We had MindMed and people like Kevin O'Leary doing the talk show rounds, talking up MindMed. So we had all this mainstream media coverage kind of hyping up the industry. And since then, we really have had radio silence on the mainstream airwaves. And even when we get positive news stories like the Compass Pathways phase 2B clinical trial results that got released, which were positive though mixed. We can get into that later if we want, but still on the whole, very positive data. We didn't really see any sort of movement, or any movement we saw was negative to that. So I'm not really sure that in the immediate future that any good news, unless it's absolutely fantastic, like something along the lines of the MAPS clinical trial. Like if we get that, like if say MindMed's phase 2B trial treating anxiety with LSD comes out and it has like 80% effectiveness, then maybe that could work. If it's like extremely great news like that. But in terms of this kind of good news, but not like great news that we've been getting over the last 6 months, I just don't think that the wider population is going to be paying that much attention. So there might be a little disconnect between the work that's being done and the stock market. One of my favorite stock YouTube analysts, Hyperchange, he looks at Tesla among other tech stocks. One of the phrases he uses is that in the short term, the stock market is a popularity contest, but in the long term, it's a scale. It's a weighing mechanism. So personally, I, again, have zero idea what these stocks are going to do in the next year. And I want to be clear about that. And I would highly suggest if you're planning on selling within a year to not get in, because we don't know. It's going to be volatile. But I just am not sure that for anybody that follows the thesis that psychedelic medicines are going to, in 5+ years, disrupt the mental health care industry, if that thesis holds true, then it doesn't matter what happens in the short term to these stocks. And maybe I do expect, just on the previous research, that we're going to continue to see a lot of these smaller studies coming out over the next year, let's say, because we have a whole bunch of phase 2A trials now that are either underway or about to be underway. So we're going to start getting more and more data that we've ever had before. And I'd like to think, if only for my own portfolio, I'd like to think that some of these positive results are going to shift the market in the short term, but I'm not necessarily banking on it. I'm not sure if I answered your question there. I kind of went on a little ramble.
Of course, we appreciate all the rambles, all the expertise you can share, James. You know, with the explosion of interest for psychedelics and the potential for these candidates as they continue to develop, we've seen also a big interest from companies, new companies to come out and express their interest in the market. I'm wondering if you can share your perspective on the breakdown of the market. Recently at the LIFT conference, there was a bit of a discussion about the growing divide between the companies that are investigating these drugs in a very pharma-like model, companies maybe advancing a platform of clinics, and companies interested or working on recreational aspect where it may be legal or retreats, other kinds of aspects in the industry. How do you see the balance between the different types of companies in the sector? Maybe, what are sort of the things that interest you outside of also the drug development program aspect?
So that's a great question, and it's something I've actually been thinking about a lot more recently. I think when we talked last time, I was mostly focused on the pharmaceutical angle and the companies that are working to create new drugs. But since then, I've been learning a lot about some of the companies that are working in the clinic space and what makes them kind of special or exciting, whatever the adjective is that you want to use, is that they can be generating revenue right now, as opposed to, like, say, the MindMeds, Compasses, Atais, where we're realistically probably still 5 years out from them making a profit or even revenue. If you look at like the Numinuses or the Delics of the world, Delic Core, who are operating clinics right now, they're by no means profitable at the moment, these companies, but they're able to start making money. And if everything goes well, perhaps they can scale to a point where they are profitable and they are getting a return on their investment in the next year, in the next 2 years. Now, having said that, when we're looking at the long-term potential, I still do think that it's mostly in the pharmaceutical companies, because these companies that are just running clinics, they're, even if they manage to break even and then make even healthy profits on these clinics, we're not talking about something that is revolutionary or game changing. They're a part of the node in the system that might be revolutionary. But if, let's say, these clinics in 4, 5, 6 years are administering, let's say the winner of the race is Cybin CYB003. I don't know if it will be. I'm just using an example. So they're modified psilocybin. If all of these clinics are using CYB003, then yeah, these clinics might be making a little bit of profit, and that'll be good for shareholders. But in terms of trying to get those alpha gains, those 5, 6, 7, 10x returns, that will be on the company that patents and sells the compounds, whoever that might end up being. Might be MindMed, might be Atai, might be a company we aren't even talking about right now, like Small Pharma, for example, or Trip Therapeutics. But so yeah, so what I'm trying to say is that these clinic models are by no means are necessarily bad investments. And like, I like personally holding ETFs, and those ETFs hold a lot of these clinics. But in terms of where I am looking at to try to really make an impact on my wider portfolio, it still is the pharmaceutical industry. When we're looking at recreational, maybe that could be a play if society moves a little bit quicker than I'm expecting it to. Like if Canada or the United States decides, hey, let's actually just legalize psilocybin, or I guess the European Union also would work. I just don't see that happening, frankly. Like, even if particular states in the US legalize psilocybin, like Oregon has done, as long as it remains illegal on the federal level, there's just going to be too many barriers for these companies. Like, you're not able to use banks that are regulated under the federal jurisdiction. Like, in my opinion, there's just too many hurdles. And personally, I would love to see psilocybin specifically, and also LSD, maybe DMT, become full-on legalized, like not just decriminalized, but full-on legalized for personal recreational use. It's not going to happen. Like, I'd love it to happen, but I just don't see it happening. And that really limits the long-term potential. Like, I love these companies. Like, I love what some of them are doing, like especially Red Light Holland, especially Red Light Holland. Like, they are really building a brand around the culture of microdosing, which I find is so cool. And that can really take off in the Netherlands. But like, just in terms of the full potential of it, I'm just not sure that I really see it unless society moves quicker than we currently are. And by the way, that is not in any way, shape, or form hating on Red Light Holland. I love the company. I got the chance to meet Todd Shapiro. I think he's a wonderful, wonderful human being. I think his company is going to do well. I think they'll eventually be profitable. But I personally am aiming for those like 5, 6, 10, 20x returns over 10 years, let's say. And again, I just see that personally. I could be wrong. I see that in the in the hands of the companies that are creating the new drugs.
Yeah. Well, James, before we get to those 10 years, we gotta get to next year. So 2022, what are your expectations? What are you maybe seeing or sensing that the market will develop as themes into the space? What are you feeling when it comes to 2022?
So the things I want to see in 2022 are Compass Pathways launching a phase 3 clinical trial for treating treatment-resistant depression with their psilocybin COMP360. I really want to see that. I really want to see MindMed's phase 2B trial treating anxiety disorder, generalized anxiety disorder using LSD, which supposedly is supposed to start within the next couple weeks, but if it gets pushed back a month or two, like who cares? As long as it actually gets underway. I want to see some of these new chemical entities eventually make it into clinical trials. So one of the most interesting and exciting aspects of this entire conversation is we're getting all this fantastic data on our quote unquote classical psychedelics, your LSD, your DMT, your mescaline, your missing one, your LSD, psilocybin, DMT, whatever, MDMA. We're getting all this fantastic data on it. But in the background, we have all these different companies that are working on new versions of these drugs that maybe can tweak the formula somewhat so that the drugs counteract some of the potential negative side effects of it. So a great example is ibogaine, is this extremely hallucinogenic substance that will put you into a hallucination for like a full day. It comes from the iboga plant found in East Africa, I believe. And in anecdotal reports and also studies, both preclinical and non-controlled studies, ibogaine is shown to be really great at treating addiction. However, there are also cardiovascular issues that are found in it, and the extremely intense day-long hallucination isn't great either. So MindMed actually has this compound called 18MC, and they're finishing a phase 1 trial very soon, supposedly. And what 18MC does is it's ibogaine, but without the cardiovascular problems and without the hallucination. So it's a non-hallucinogenic drug. They've tweaked the chemical formulation of that. So if that can be shown to treat, they're looking to treat opioid use disorder, but addictions in general. If that can work, then we have an entirely new ballgame on our hands where we're looking past the classical psychedelics, and really it's a race for who can create the best psychedelics. We talked earlier about Cybin is doing it, but everybody's doing it. Atai is doing it. Compass Pathways is doing it. Field Trip has their FT104. They're doing it. And basically every company that you can think of now is not only working, or every pharmaceutical company is psychedelic pharmaceutical company is not only working on their classical psychedelics, but also second and third generation ones. Like one of the ones that I'm most excited for is Small Pharma. They have right now, they're undergoing DMT clinical trials to treat depression, major depressive disorder, and they're in phase 2A trials. But coming down the pipeline, they also have a new version of DMT called SPL028, I believe. I might have that wrong, but I believe that's what it's called. And that is a modified version of DMT that will make the experience more suitable for therapeutic settings. So that really also throws a monkey wrench into the retail investors' plan, because back a year ago or a year and a half ago, March last year, when people first started looking into this, you had one option, MindMed, essentially. Now you've got 20 different options of companies that are all not only working on psychedelics, classical psychedelics, but also next generation psychedelics. So one of the big core problems from a retail investor's perspective over the next coming few years is going to be picking the winners. Like even if you're relatively confident, like I am, that the psychedelics industry will be a winner, that's not enough. You got to know which companies within the industry are going to be winners. And then one other thing that I find extremely interesting, but I have no idea if it's going to work or not, is there have begun to be a handful of trials that are testing psychedelics not only for mental health conditions, but also physical health conditions. So there's companies treating fibromyalgia. I believe that's TRIP. I might have that wrong, but I believe that's TRIP. There's companies looking to treat strokes, like this company called Algeron wants to treat strokes using DMT. I mean, I have no idea if that's going to work or not. There's been some positive preclinical data in mice, or at least in the cells of mice, that show that it might be possible. But if in the next year, 2 years, we start to see data that psychedelics can actually help physical health conditions on top of just mental health conditions, then that's like blowing the doors wide open. And who knows what the potential at the end of the day there would be. But that's extremely speculative. Like, we're in the very, very beginning. If we're in inning 1 of psychedelics to treat mental health, we're still singing the national anthem when it comes to physical health.
Now, James, before we wrap up, any parting thought to investors out there looking at this space?
Yeah, I just want to be absolutely clear that even though I'm a hyperbull when it comes to the sector, if you're thinking about investing in the sector, you need to be responsible with your money. I know that some people out there, kind of the Reddit investors, they often see something and they want to go all in. And that's just not necessarily sound advice. Like, I personally absolutely hard cap, limit my portfolio exposure to the psychedelic space at 10%. It's probably closer to 5% right now. But what I'm trying to say, just in general, if you're out there watching this and you're saying, oh, wow, this seems like a great idea. Like, in 10 plus years, I could be a millionaire if I put in my entire life savings into this. Just don't do that. Be responsible with your money. And I'm only saying this because in the videos that I do, often people will put down like, I'm all in on this company. And like, no, be responsible with your money, guys. That's all I really wanted to say.
Appreciate the message, James. Well, we'll have to wrap it up there. Thank you so much today for all your expertise.
Thank you so much for having me on, Brian. I look forward to talking again.
Absolutely. And thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel for even more expert interviews. For the Investing News Network, I am Brian McGovern, and we'll see you next time.